I don't do a huge amount of lipping, but when I do, when I'm making a kitchen or something and I want to edge band a load of melamine carcasses, obviously using an iron takes a huge amount of time, but I don't want to spend thousands of pounds on a proper edge bander. So I've come up with a kind of Wallace and Gromit style version. This bench is my normal bench for my pillar drill and my mitre saw, so it's not a special bench just for lipping. My roll of iron-on lipping sits the other side of the fence, held in place by just a few screws, and the iron-on lipping runs around the screws and into this. Normally is a sort of like a metal tunnel, and at the end there is just a standard heat gun directed at the glue side, which obviously melts the glue very quickly. The hot lipping then comes through the front of the bench and is directed this way, where it meets obviously the shelf or the side of the cupboard. Now, a lot of people sort of DIY would sort of leave it at that and then just push it up against it, but I wanted a much quicker, more automated process. So I've got my spindle moulder feeder here, and this then grabs the board and takes it through, applying obviously pressure up against the fence where the lipping is. And this obviously also pulls in more lipping, and it gets quite a bit of pressure against the fence, which then makes a nice edge. Once the board has come through the feeder, it's obviously got its lipping stuck onto it, but it's also, as it's a continuous run, it's not a single board, but it's also the lipping stuck to the board in front of it and the board behind it. And so we need to obviously separate these boards from the lipping to create this sort of continuous run. And the way to do that is simply, I put in a 50mm spacing block, just a bit of MDF, and then as the board in front goes over this micro switch, and then the micro switch pings back up again, this activates or triggers the relay of the feeder to stop the feeder. So the whole thing's then, the whole sort of process stops. It also at the same time sets off a pneumatic piston, which is pulling on the end of a Stanley knife underneath the table, which then pivots up and cuts through the lipping. So let me demonstrate that just by pressing on the micro switch now. As you see, Stanley knife blade comes up quite quickly, chops straight through the lipping and disappears back under the table. And as soon as it's back, the feeder carries on, and the process sort of repeats itself. Obviously, as soon as this lipping is cut, this board, the board ahead of the board being lipped, is now free with its edge stuck on, so then the person sort of standing over in this area can then lift that board up and put it to one side, whilst someone else operating sort of this end is sort of feeding the boards in with their 50mm blocks. And you can get it working really efficiently. We recycle the blocks between the two people, and it works really well. Providing there's, we keep up with it and we don't put pieces through that are too small, then it works really well.
These are short ones.
obviously it's vastly quicker than using an iron. Probably cost like £400 to make. I got this second hand for just under £300, and you know, 100 quid on some other bits. Yeah, really kind of quick and efficient way of doing it. The other great thing for me is I'm not in a huge workshop. It's about 10 metres by 5 metres, so I can't afford to have a huge Edgebander sort of sat there doing nothing for most of the time. But the great thing is I mostly use this on my spindle moulder, so this feeder obviously comes off and goes back on the spindle moulder. Pillar drill then swings round and is used on the bench, and is completely invisible. The sanding knife is under the bench anyway, and we just tuck the micro switch back below. And there's not even really anything this side of the bench, because all it is a heat gun and a roller lipping. So I found this a great way of using basically no space at all in my workshop except for when I'm using it, and doing edge banding really quickly and cheaply. Obviously a proper sort of edge bander would also trim the ends and trim the sides. I'll either, if I'm using 2mm thick oak, I'll just use a router for that, or if it's just this sort of 0.3mm melamine edging, then I'll just use a sanding knife blade, which is so quick it doesn't really add much time to the process.